U.S.-Chinese competition in Africa during the second Trump term. Professor Ahmet Oysal. The President Donald Trump is expected to cause some geopolitical changes around the world. He will focus on stopping China's advance economically and politically as its main competitor around the world. President Obama tried to shift the USA attention to Asia with the notion of Asia Axis in 2011 after Chinese economy passed Germany in 2009 and Japan in 2010. Since then the USA could not stop China. According to the IMF data, today the Chinese GDP equals $18.3 trillion while the German and Japanese GDPs remain $4.7 and $4.1 trillion respectively, exceeding the half of US GDP of $29.2 trillion. During his first term, Donald Trump tried to limit the Chinese economic expansion by imposing extra tariffs and sanctions, e.g. 5G technology, but he fell short with the arrival of Joe Biden that focused on Russia and loosened the pressure on China. In his new term, we can expect that Trump's America First approach will seriously focus on China once again on several fronts: economy, diplomacy, and geopolitics. The Middle East and Africa regions will witness a U.S.-Chinese competition. Both are critical with their strategic location, energy, natural and human resources. For the purpose of this article, we will focus on the U.S.-Chinese struggle for Africa in economic, cultural, political, and military areas. The recent years noticed the weakening of France in Africa as voices rose against the former colonizer in such countries like Chad, Mali, Burkina Faso. Russia, which is at war with the West in Ukraine, is trying to fill the vacuum in these countries. In the meantime, the USA has mixed feelings about this development. On the one hand, it is not happy with the replacement of a NATO ally, France, with an adversary, Russia. On the other hand, the USA can also potentially gain advantages from the weakening of France in its former colonies. In recent decades, China's influence was felt heavily in the Black Continent as it invested in infrastructure projects, ports, railways and roads, as part of its Road and Belt project, and it also feeds its economy with African raw materials. China also gives low-interest loans to receive advantageous contracts in African countries. When the governments cannot pay back those loans, Chinese companies receive additional contracts and their debt would pile up. The USA strategy is not as aggressive as China's because it provides foreign aid and wants that American companies to do business in Africa. There is an old debate that the solution to Africa's poverty is not aid but trade, urging the Western countries to facilitate trade with Africa. Foreign aid policy is criticized for destroying some already fragile sectors and for sustaining failed regimes in Africa. China is criticized for submerging African countries in debt trap. Of course, China and the USA are not alone in their competition, as other powers such as the UK and Germany, India and Turkey are also engaging with Africa economically. On the political front, many powers value the votes of 54 African countries in the United Nations. This issue became critical in voting on the Ukraine war, the condemnation of Israel, or the recognition of Taiwan. The USA tries to impose itself as the defender of human rights and democracy, and its aid is tied with some political conditions. However, the Chinese aid and loans do not include such political conditions, reducing the significance of these selective democratic credentials. In fact, the Western conditions of democracy and human rights did not improve the records of any African country. Both China and the United States want to be involved in the security issues of Africa. China has a military base in Djibouti, and the U.S. Africa Command, AFRICOM, has a significant presence in the continent in the name of fighting terrorism. Russia continues to play a role in the defense and security of Africa with its Wagner forces and its old and new allies that buy Russian warcraft such as Algeria and Egypt and Sahel countries. The new Trump administration may increase its understanding with Russia at the expense of France to pressure Chinese interests in Africa. As an African proverb puts it, when elephants fight, it is the grass that suffers.